denied entry to a luxury restaurant due to appearing out of place. The following day, a black SUV arrived, and no one anticipated who emerged. Charlotte's son was exhibiting his characteristic behavior in early spring, brilliant, somewhat showy, reflecting off every glass building downtown. Ideal weather for finalizing a deal. Cassandra Belton had recently concluded a walkthrough of a young couple's first home, a small three-bedroom with creaky floors and considerable potential. She found them appealing, these newlyweds, diligent individuals who still embraced the idea of constructing things from the foundations. She recognized aspects of herself within them. At 52, Cassandra had accomplished precisely that, establishing something from nothing. Without inherited wealth, she took no easy routes. Instead, she relied on time, perseverance, and a determination to continue. She wasn't ostentatious. Such displays weren't necessary for her. Her self-assurance manifested in her demeanor, in how she occupied silence in a room without needing to assert control. Following the showing, she drove 5 minutes to Le Mistral, a high-end restaurant on Tryon Street. She hadn't intended to dine there. It simply occurred to her as she stopped at the last traffic light. Indulge yourself, Cass, you deserve it. She parked her Lexus, glanced at her phone, and exited the vehicle. She wore no blazer, only a crisp white tee tucked into tailored dark jeans and gray suede flats. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she wore no makeup aside from gloss. The ensemble presented a polished and sophisticated aesthetic, suitable for both a casual cafe and a formal boardroom setting. The hostess provided a brief assessment, offered a rehearsed smile, and escorted her to a table for two situated by the window. The lunchtime rush hadn't begun. Cassandra reviewed the menu, already anticipating the grilled salmon with couscous. However, even before her water was served, he arrived. He seemed to be around 38 years old, with a strong jawline and slick-back hair and an excessive amount of cologne. His expression featured a smile that seemed to mask something deeper. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her table as if he'd practiced, "I'm afraid we have a dress code here." Cassandra looked up slowly. "Excuse me? The restaurant requires a particular standard. Our guests generally appreciate a more refined appearance." She blinked. "I'm wearing clean clothes, I smell like spring, and I just closed a $500,000 sale 2 blocks from here. I'd say I'm pretty refined." A pause. His smile became less relaxed. "We've received complaints." She tilted her head. Whose concerns were these? He looked toward the front desk, then back to her. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." There was no disturbance. Cassandra didn't raise her voice. She didn't weep. She posed a single question. Calmly, steadily. "Is it my clothes? Or is it my skin?" He didn't respond. Instead, he indicated toward security. A young man, clearly feeling awkward, approached and in a hushed tone requested that she collect her belongings. She rose, retrieved her purse, and exited. A heavy silence followed her every movement. Outside, she settled into her car, closed the door, and stared straight ahead for a significant period. She made no calls and created no videos. However, someone else did. A woman, seated in a corner booth near the bar, had observed the entire incident, recorded it, and uploaded it online, tagging the restaurant and local news outlets, along with numerous other accounts. By sundown, the video had accumulated 230,000 views. By midnight, it reached 2.3 million. Cassandra's phone began to receive numerous notifications. Her assistant, her nephew, clients, even someone from the Charlotte Observer had tried to reach her. But she didn't answer, because Cassandra wasn't going to react. She was going to respond. And those are two very different things. By the time the sun rose over Charlotte the next morning, Le Mistral had a problem. Not a small, quiet problem they could handle with a quick direct message or a vague apology. No, this was national. This was loud. The situation escalated to the point where legal counsel and public relations professionals were joining early morning Zoom meetings, even before their coffee was finished. The video itself was brief, just 37 seconds in length. It began with a composed black woman seated near a window, looking down at her menu. The restaurant appeared almost deserted. A quiet clinking of silverware could be heard in the background, along with the gentle sound of soft jazz. Then, he appeared, the manager. He approached as if offering a beverage, but his body language was inappropriate. His voice was understated and excessively courteous. There was a strange formality, the kind people adopt when they feel they've made a mistake but still want to maintain composure. The viewer didn't hear everything that was said, but they understood enough. Phrases like "we have a dress code" and "concern skew to leave" were audible. The camera subtly shifted, revealing Cassandra rising. She remained silent, simply gathering her purse. Then a single quiet sentence hung in the air. "Is it my clothes? Or is it my skin?" That was the pivotal moment. The entire comment section paused, replaying the scene and watching it again. That statement resonated unexpectedly with audiences. It wasn't delivered with raised voices. It wasn't a formal address, simply a question. Yet it had a powerful impact. Initially, Twitter reacted strongly. Subsequently, TikTok followed suit. Facebook then saw a wave of lengthy posts from individuals who had similar experiences. Gradually, people began investigating. Who was this woman? Why hadn't she previously spoken out? It emerged that Cassandra Belton wasn't just an ordinary customer. People started linking pieces of information together. She consistently ranked among the leading Black real estate brokers in Mecklenburg County. Last year, she was highlighted in Charlotte Real Estate Weekly. A quiet professional, she maintained a record free of controversy and sensationalism, building a career on consistent success and a reputation for ethical conduct. Several former clients shared their experiences. One recounted how she assisted her mother in purchasing a first home following the loss of her father. Another shared that she hadn't been charged the full commission, with the broker stating her desire to provide support. A third client also wrote, "Ms. Belton assisted me in resolving a difficult mortgage situation. She was invaluable. I consider her a remarkable person." Cassandra remained silent. Media representatives were stationed outside her office close to South Park. Her assistant denied them access. Respectfully but assertively, she stated that she was not prepared to release a statement. Le Mistral, however, issued several public statements. Initially, they released a routine message. "We are cognizant of an occurrence involving a patron and are assessing the issue internally." This statement was met with derision online. What happened? The video was clear. The woman didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. She didn't even finish her appetizer. And yet she was escorted out as if she'd caused a disturbance. The restaurant's Yelp and Google pages were inundated with one-star reviews. Apparently, racism was present. One person wrote a review. Another posted online, "Be mindful of your appearance or identity, it seems." The manager from the video, whose name eventually leaked, was Owen Lindley. He had been employed there for 3 years. Previously a hospitality manager in Naples, Florida, she was recognized for her stringent standards regarding presentation. An anonymous former employee of Le Mistral detailed an incident last year, alleging she subjected a Black couple to scrutiny, citing their shoes, Ferragamo, as a point of complaint. As controversy erupted online, Cassandra's name gained significant attention. Despite the public outcry, she remained silent. This wasn't due to fear, but rather a deliberate act of careful consideration and calculation. She had no desire for viral fame or symbolic representation. Her focus was on the long view. She had dedicated her life to creating something enduring and wouldn't allow one overbearing manager to reduce her to a trending topic. That afternoon, she finally settled at her kitchen table. Her laptop was open, and she read silently. She avoided checking the comments section and disregarded any memes. Instead, she focused on a single item, an email from a man she hadn't heard from in years. It read, "Cass, saw the video. You navigated the situation, as you always do, with quiet strength. Should you wish to take action regarding this matter, I am available to assist." The document was signed. Harlan Desmond, managing partner, Desmond and Klein Civil Rights Law. She studied the name for a moment. Then, a smile touched her lips. Because now, she was not alone. Many who viewed that video perceived grace and composure. However, those who had grown up with Cassandra Belton would understand the source of that grace and recognize that it had not been easily attained. Cassandra was raised in Southfield, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. She was raised by her mother, a retired elementary school teacher, and her father, who worked for 35 years at a Chrysler plant. Her parents emphasized listening over silence and instilled in her the understanding that calmness is a strategic tool, particularly for a Black woman navigating a world shaped by assumptions. Growing up, she observed her mother skillfully correcting others with a smile and her father successfully resolving disagreements without raising his voice. From these experiences, she developed the ability to carefully consider her words. She understood the value of choosing opportune times and allowing others to display their anxiety before revealing her own. By age 25, Cassandra had obtained her real estate license and was selling homes during her breaks at her banking job. Initially, she focused on smaller, more affordable properties, modest starter homes, often requiring renovation and offering future possibilities. People developed trust in her. She avoided exaggeration and never made misleading claims. Instead, she communicated honestly in a composed manner and consistently maintained her presence. Among her early clients was a recently divorced woman, trying to buy her first home on a single income. Cassandra remembered her vividly because the woman broke down, crying in her office after closing. "You were the first person who didn't treat me like a mistake," she said. Those moments stuck with her more than the commission checks ever did. So by the time she sat at her kitchen table in Charlotte, reading Harlan Desmond's email, Cassandra wasn't thinking about revenge. She considered how many individuals wouldn't have responded to the restaurant manager's demeanor as she did, and how many wouldn't have had the advantage of a stranger documenting the incident. Harlan was more than a lawyer. They had been classmates at Michigan State. He had been outspoken then, full of passion and protest signs. She was more reserved, more deliberate, but they held mutual respect for one another. And despite drifting apart over the years, she had continued to follow his career. Civil rights cases in Oakland, police discrimination suits in Tallahassee. He didn't employ a flamboyant courtroom style, but he was remarkably astute. She selected the reply button. Her message was concise. "Let's talk. Tomorrow." The following morning, they convened at a tranquil cafe in Dilworth. Cassandra wore the same white tee and jeans as she did at Le Mistral, as if she was conveying a message, but one only a select few would understand. Harlan was already present, black coffee in hand, eyes surveying the room. He rose as she entered. He made no comment about the video or the headlines. Instead, he gestured towards the seat opposite him. "So," he began, "tell me what you want." She paused briefly before responding, "I want change, but I want it to affect them negatively." He acknowledged her with a nod. "Financial, legal, reputational, everything," she confirmed. He smiled, but it wasn't arrogant. Then she suggested, "Let's start with the company that owns the building. If they're leasing to Le Mistral, they're responsible for what occurs on that property." Cassandra moved closer. "Let me investigate the manager," he stated. "However, yes, there are potential courses of action. Your removal from the business establishment at Giovanni's did not appear to violate policy. If the issue was related to attire, that's a matter of opinion. If it concerned anything else, that's a civil matter." Cassandra took a sip of her tea and inquired, "What about pursuing options beyond simply filing a claim? Do you mean involving the press?" He asked. "No," she replied. "I mean initiating a discussion, perhaps a meeting, something they wouldn't anticipate." He raised his eyebrows. "A formal meeting? With me? And several others?" "Who are these others?" she asked, a faint smile playing on her lips. "People who understand precisely what it's like to be me, and a few who don't, but need to." He hesitated. "Are you certain?" "I'm finished being considerate to safeguard other people's feelings," she stated. They were at ease when they caused me humiliation, and now she was finished prioritizing other people's comfort at her own expense. The following afternoon, lunchtime proceeded with its typical cadence at Le Mistral. Waiters moved silently between tables, carrying trays of sparkling water and pan-seared halibut. The dining room was filled with the sounds of clinking silverware and quiet conversations. Owen Lindley, the manager, stood behind the host's stand, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning every corner as if anticipating something, though he couldn't say what. Then, a black Cadillac Escalade arrived in front of the restaurant, its windows darkly tinted, reflecting the sidewalk. Initially, no one noticed. This was a place accustomed to seeing high-end cars coming and going. However, the valet paused. As the back door opened, the air seemed to shift subtly. Cassandra Belton emerged first. Her attire mirrored the previous days: white tee, jeans, and suede flats. However, she now wore a long beige trench coat over her clothing. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer felt the need to prove anything. Following her, 3 more people exited the vehicle. Harlan Desmond, holding a briefcase. A woman in her 60s with thick silver braids and a serious expression. Dr. Renee Darnell, sociology professor and longtime advocate for racial equity in public spaces, was also present. And last, Andre Weiss, regional director for a high-profile real estate investment group, arrived, sharply dressed in navy slacks and a linen shirt. He had no interest in speaking to the press. His firm owned the building Le Mistral rented. Inside, Owen observed the scene from behind the glass doors, his face paling. He turned to his assistant manager and quietly mentioned needing to make a call. However, the opportunity had passed. Cassandra entered the front door without acknowledging anyone, as if she belonged there. This visit wasn't for a meal. She was there to speak. The maitre d' was stunned. "Mom, we're expected," Cassandra stated, her voice calm yet resolute. Andre approached, gestured to the staff, and added, "Conference room, please." It was important to tell Mr. Lindley he should probably be present. The staff offered no objections. 10 minutes later, within the private upstairs room, typically used for wine tastings and corporate parties, the 5 of them gathered around a polished oak table. Water was served. The door shut. And for the first time, Owen Lindley felt somewhat insignificant. Harlan opened a slim folder and presented a printed copy of the restaurant's dress code. Thus, he began, turning the page. White t-shirts. Prohibited? Owen shifted uncomfortably. "We prefer collared shirts," Harlan repeated, "but not required." He added, "Well, it's about tone, too. Presentation. We have a standard." Harlan nodded toward Cassandra, stating, "Your client is a well-known businesswoman in this community." He continued, "No signs of intoxication. No disruptive behavior." She sat down, quietly reviewed the menu, and was removed. Owen shifted in his seat. "It wasn't personal," he said. "I didn't ask if it was personal," Cassandra said, interrupting for the first time. "I repeatedly questioned myself, wondering if I had entered the space with a different complexion. Would you have reacted identically?" A profound silence followed. Andre moved closer. "We are not simply engaged in a conversation. This constitutes a breach of the lease agreement. This restaurant functions with a non-discrimination clause stipulated within our leasing terms. You may be the manager, Mr. Lindley, but I represent the organization that owns this building, and we're evaluating your standing." Owen's mouth opened, but he remained silent. Dr. Darnell then spoke. The incident wasn't isolated. It highlighted the danger of misinterpreting quietude as vulnerability. You anticipated her absence, believing the matter would disappear. However, she didn't require loud pronouncements to be acknowledged. She simply needed to remain present long enough for others to observe you. Owen attempted to dismiss. "Look, if she desires an apology, I don't want your apology," Cassandra stated. "I want accountability, and a change in how people are treated here. Not just me. To all present." The interaction proceeded calmly, without raised voices or legal warnings. 5 individuals were fully aware of their actions, and one man abruptly understood he no longer held authority. Owen Lindley remained still, his shoulders drawn, the knot of his tie subtly pressing against his throat. He was accustomed to being in command. Generally, his voice commanded respect, appearing resolute and conclusive. However, within this room, among these people, it lacked its usual impact. It simply wasn't the same. Harlan Desmond relaxed in his chair, allowing a pause to linger. Next, he put 2 sheets of paper onto the table. Page 1, he stated, is a compilation of grievances submitted by former employees and visitors at this location during the last 18 months. Numerous entries concern dress code regulations. One specifically names you, Mr. Lindley. Owen did not take the papers. Harlan continued, pushing the second sheet across the table. This is a draft of a formal letter that could be submitted to your building's management and shared with local media. It explains how bias, whether intentional or unintentional, has been a recurring issue, not an isolated incident. Yes, Owen began. We don't expect you to apologize, Cassandra added, her voice calm. This isn't about revenge. It's about correcting a problem. Consider this an opportunity for positive change rather than a criticism. Dr. Darnell then addressed the group. We reside in a city striving to be perceived as progressive, inclusive, and globally aware. However, incidents such as this reveal underlying realities. The important aspect isn't the initial error, but the actions taken afterward. Andre Weiss, who had remained largely silent until this point, finally moved closer. The board responsible for this property will convene next week. We will be reviewing your lease. Cassandra's situation might be the one captured on video, but we will be looking at the wider context. This includes staff turnover, guest feedback, and Owen's voice faltered slightly when he finally asked, What do you want? Cassandra met his gaze. A public apology, not a generic statement from your PR firm. Your voice, your face. Take responsibility, Owen. Owen blinked. That's acceptable. Cassandra continued, I want to meet with the staff, front and back of house, not to lecture, but to talk about what hospitality really means, what dignity means. Owen nodded slowly, but Harlan raised a hand. That means a formal arrangement, not a photo op, no cameras, just people learning how not to repeat the same mistake. Finally, Cassandra added, she wanted the restaurant to fund a quarterly dining program providing complimentary culinary experiences for underserved high school students with an interest in the food industry. Both front of house and back of house positions would be included, allowing them to experience a welcoming environment where they often feel excluded. Owen hesitated. That's a significant undertaking. It's a reasonable proposal, Andre stated before Cassandra could reply. To be direct, if I had sole decision-making power, I would suggest ending the lease completely. I viewed this as a gesture of goodwill. The atmosphere changed noticeably, not due to any increase in physical weight, but because Owen finally grasped the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't centered on him personally, it concerned what he symbolized. And what Cassandra was undertaking was more than just a reaction. It was a fundamental change. He cleared his throat, then stated, Okay, I will proceed. No, Cassandra responded, her tone measured. You will initiate it. The distinction is significant. The assembly rose deliberately. Documents were gathered. The water glasses seemed half empty. The room felt strangely calm, but not empty. Something had occurred here, something shifted. As they left the conference room, a young waitress caught Cassandra's eye. She appeared to be no older than 23. The waitress remained silent, offering only a small nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but respect. Cassandra returned a smile, just enough to signal that she recognized her presence. While the main dining room downstairs continued serving truffle risotto and wine, a change was already underway, whether the restaurant was aware or not. The restaurant's apology video was released the next morning. It was brief, lasting just under 2 minutes. The video was filmed inside Le Mistral's main dining room, with the bar visible in the background. Owen Lindley appeared standing in front of a small round table, his shoulders square, but his face visibly strained. The video utilized no dramatic lighting and avoided flashy editing. A man appeared, looking as if he hadn't rested properly in days. My name is Owen Lindley, he began, and I want to speak directly to Ms. Cassandra Belton, and to anyone who saw the video of our interaction. He spoke without a prepared text. This was evident. His delivery was occasionally halting, but these imperfections only served to strengthen his words. He confessed the truth, that he had formed a judgment based on appearance, that he responded emotionally rather than thoughtfully, that he permitted personal prejudice to supersede policy and professionalism. Then he made the unexpected declaration. I didn't perceive her. Truly. And that's the crux of the matter. The internet erupted almost instantly. Concerns arose. Was the apology sincere? Was it too delayed? A deliberate tactic? However, the most impactful element for many viewers wasn't Owen. It was Cassandra, who published a written statement 1 hour later. The statement was brief, consisting of just 4 paragraphs on her business website. There were no hashtags. It lacked a viral feel. She didn't boast. She didn't seek compassion. She simply detailed the events. This is what she requested and what the restaurant committed to providing. She specifically highlighted the new program for aspiring culinary students at Willow Creek Culinary Institute. She also expressed her gratitude to the ownership group of the Golden Spoon for collaborating with her directly. Finally, in a concluding line, she wrote, "Dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you carry. And when it's denied, you don't always need to fight to get it back. Sometimes you just need to stand still long enough for people to see it was always there." The written announcement gained traction even more rapidly than the video itself. Cassandra's inbox was overwhelmed once more. However, this time it was distinct. Local charitable organizations contacted her, seeking collaboration on the Student Dining Initiative. A restaurant group in Seattle inquired if she would address their leadership team. Even the mayor's office conveyed a discreet message, acknowledging her actions. However, not all reactions were positive. Some individuals asserted that she was exploiting the situation, either by attributing racial undertones or capitalizing on the opportunity. A commentator on a local news segment accused her of attempting to dismiss a dedicated manager. Cassandra did not respond to these accusations. Instead, she prioritized the students. The initial event occurred just 3 weeks afterward. 15 high school juniors and seniors from West Charlotte and Harding University High arrived at La Mistral after hours, accompanied by their culinary arts teachers. The staff had thoroughly cleaned the kitchen. 3 chefs generously donated their time to instruct the students on plating, preparation, and service. Cassandra remained largely quiet that evening, moving between tables and observing them slice, stir, and taste with focused expressions. One student, a girl just under 5 feet tall with purple braids and intense concentration, turned to her after trying her initial attempt at risotto and exclaimed, "I didn't even know food could taste like this." Cassandra smiled and replied, "It can. And so can opportunity." Meanwhile, Owen was not present at the restaurant that evening. Following the incident, he was transitioned away from daily operations and now holds a limited administrative position at the corporate office. This wasn't a dramatic dismissal, but rather a quiet consequence, precisely the outcome Cassandra had intended. Her aim wasn't to destroy someone's life, but to ensure they lived with a lasting reminder. That reminder now manifested as 15 eager young students, laughing and learning inside a restaurant that had once attempted to exclude someone like them. The situation seemed almost unbelievable. The very establishment that had previously rejected Cassandra due to not aligning with its perceived atmosphere was now undergoing a noticeable change, occurring one table, one lesson at a time. 2 months later, Cassandra was standing outside a quiet little cafe in Durham, North Carolina, enjoying a courte-à-deux while awaiting her lunch date. This was not a business engagement. She had taken the day off. She had driven 2 hours from Charlotte simply to clear her head and connect with an old friend. The events surrounding La Mistral were in the past for her. Largely, the video was no longer prominent on trending lists. The restaurant had recovered under a new temporary manager, and the student culinary program, it continued with another session planned for next month. Cassandra had decided she would no longer supervise it directly. It was now in the hands of the students. As she sat beneath the awning, sunlight spreading across the pavement, a young woman wearing a UNC hoodie passed by, slowed, and turned back. "Excuse me, are you Cassandra Belton?" Cassandra looked up. She nodded once. The girl offered a wide smile. "I saw your video, the one involving the restaurant. I simply wanted to express my gratitude. You presented things authentically, like a mature woman would." Cassandra laughed quietly. That's a way to describe it. No, truly. You conveyed your message without creating unnecessary drama. My aunt speaks of you as if you were Michelle Obama's older relative. They both chuckled. The girl waved goodbye, maintaining her smile. Cassandra didn't require external approval. That moment held significance, not due to vanity, but because it indicated that the appropriate individuals were observing. The next generation was noting how matters were being addressed. Subsequently, that afternoon, she entered a small bistro located across the street for lunch. The host, a man in his 20s with a nose ring and slightly frayed cuffs on his sleeves, looked up and offered her a sincere smile. "Welcome," he said. "Are you dining alone or expecting someone?" "Alone," she replied. A window seat was acceptable, ideal even. He took a menu and guided her to a booth where sunlight streamed across the table. He didn't pause. He didn't scrutinize her attire. Her outfit consisted of a simple linen shirt and cream-colored slacks. As he went to fetch her water, Cassandra surveyed the restaurant. A couple murmured quietly near the back. Two women enjoyed a dessert together. A man on his laptop typed rapidly, as if the world was about to end. It was normal, ordinary, beautiful in its simplicity. She recalled that day at Le Mistral, the shift in Owen Lindley's expression, the subtle encouragement she received, the critical commentary as well, the burden of being thrust into a pivotal moment when all she desired was lunch. She held no regrets, because that moment had shown her and reminded others that silence isn't the lack of strength. Sometimes it's the most profound kind of strength, the kind that listens, that waits, that observes, anticipating the opportune moment to act. And when it acts, it seeks no authorization. She retrieved her phone and launched her notes application. A sentence appeared at the top of a fresh page. "Don't waste your voice on noise. Save it for the echo." She remembered hearing that from her mother years ago. It wasn't about remaining silent. It was about being thoughtful. Be precise. Utilize your presence like a scalpel, not a hammer. As the waiter returned with her water and a polite, "Take your time," Cassandra smiled. She didn't need to assert herself today. She didn't need to demonstrate anything. She had already accomplished that. And in doing so, she left a lasting impact, not only on a restaurant, but on everyone who witnessed her maintain her composure without aggression, who observed the power of choosing dignity over conflict and still achieving success. That was the core understanding. Change doesn't always require a loud voice. It requires remaining steadfast until others understand the significance of silence. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Discuss it with others. If you haven't already, please subscribe. More stories like this, the quiet ones that speak loudest, are forthcoming. He summoned her to publicly shame her before his affluent guests. However, when she placed her hands on the piano, the room became utterly silent. Savannah heat operates without fairness in July. The air was dense and heavy, clinging to skin and making clothing feel burdensome. Beverly Gaines stood near the wrought iron gate of 742 Prospect Lane, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and a subtle moment of uncertainty in her chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anxiety, just a brief pause. A moment of stillness before entering another person's space. She hadn't anticipated employment in a residence of that nature. Not at this point in her life. 48 years old, no children, no husband. Just a one-bedroom apartment near Chatham Square and a voice that still occasionally sang in her sleep. But when her job at the dry cleaners closed unexpectedly, Beverly understood the urgency. Rent, it wouldn't wait. Upon the agency's call inquiring about her availability for a private client cleaning, she immediately accepted before they completed their request. The Whitlow estate embodied the expected grandeur of established Southern wealth. White columns, a wraparound porch, and boxwood hedges meticulously trimmed. It was a place of such refinement that even the birds seemed to move with a subdued grace. She proceeded up the steps, rang the bell, and the door opened with almost immediate responsiveness. "You're punctual," the house manager stated, looking at her clipboard without offering a smile. That was already an improvement over the previous employee. Beverly didn't take it as a slight. She rarely did. It was necessary if you wanted to retain employment in another person's home. You smile, you nod, you blend into the surroundings. The initial weeks passed without incident. She cleaned tile, shined silver, and discovered the location of every control and concealed item. She avoided drawing attention to herself, responding only when addressed, and always using sir or mom. Mr. Whitlow paid her little regard, preoccupied with entertaining lawyers, business associates, or women in high heels, all of whom departed before breakfast. Her presence wasn't meant to be acknowledged. However, one afternoon, while dusting the second-floor hallway, she stopped near the music room. The room was unoccupied, but the grand piano stood prominently, like a centerpiece in a deserted banquet hall. An itch in her hand, akin to muscle memory, prompted her movement. She entered, closing the door softly, and settled down briefly. The keys felt smooth, not new, but carefully maintained. She played a single note, then another, and a recognizable tune emerged, a childhood melody, her mother's preferred gospel hymn. Just a few measures were played, gentle and slow. She didn't notice the approaching footsteps until the final note faded. You're aware that task isn't included in your duties, correct? Beverly abruptly stood, as if discovered in wrongdoing. Mr. Whitlow rested against the doorframe, holding a wine glass and smiling knowingly. He was a man who rarely posed a question without already possessing the answer. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean you play. He interjected. She glanced downward slightly. When I was young, he tilted his head, as if she'd made a comical remark. Who would have thought? And then he departed. Beverly made no further reference to the incident, deciding she had likely tested her fortune. She was unaware that that instance had already initiated something within his thoughts, something he would utilize subsequently, not to commend her, but to exhibit her. Charles Whitlow never needed to strive for charm. He carried it as a second skin, polished, rehearsed, and just artificial enough to be hazardous. At 56, he appeared precisely the Southern gentleman he feigned to be. Linen suits during the summer, costly shoes designed for standing, not walking. His smile could market falsehoods without hesitation. Beneath the outward appearance of success, a sense of decay existed that primarily concerned the staff. To the public, he presented himself as a philanthropist, organizing fundraisers for the arts, contributing to schools, and hosting annual garden parties that garnered attention in the society pages. He engaged in public appearances, shaking hands with judges and interacting with people at political events, creating the impression of a political aspiration, despite never explicitly stating his intentions. Within the house, however, Charles maintained control through ridicule. The assistance was readily available, and he valued wielding it to discomfort others. Beverly recognized this tendency from the start. He rarely shouted or raised his voice, yet possessed a remarkable ability to diminish people's sense of self without physical contact. For instance, he once inquired of the new chef if his sophisticated California training encompassed the ability to prepare acceptable grits while serving 20 guests. On another occasion, he observed a gardener stooping to retrieve a dropped rose and remarked, "Careful now, could send you back to minimum wage." No one challenged him. No one offered a correction. He was Charles Whitlow. In this town, his reputation commanded respect. Even the legal authorities didn't always question his pronouncements. Beverly attempted to avoid him, but that wasn't always feasible. He began to probe her. Initially, these were minor comments. Gaines, he stated one morning while preparing breakfast. Have you ever worn anything other than beige? Later, while enjoying bourbon on the porch. You seem very quiet. Do you ever speak, or do you simply move about like a phantom? She did not respond to his attempt at conversation. She continued working. Then one evening, as she walked through the foyer carrying polished silver, he spoke to her. Are you still playing those piano keys when no one is present? Beverly hesitated. No, sir. He smiled, appearing skeptical. That must be amusing. She departed, feeling constricted in her throat, but maintaining a steady composure. Afterward, the other staff members cautioned her concerning him. That man's a snake, muttered Harold, the groundskeeper. He feeds on weakness. Don't let him find yours. But Whitlow didn't need to dig. He already had what he wanted. 2 weeks later, invitations started going out for his summer garden party. Beverly overheard the details while changing linens upstairs. It was going to be a large event. Close to 100 guests were expected, with live jazz music and wine flown in from Napa. The staff doubled for the weekend. Every room was scrubbed spotless. Everything had to be perfect. She had experience with large-scale events. The demands didn't bother her. Provided no one focused their attention on her for too long, she could handle it. However, Whitlow had different intentions. The night preceding the party, he intercepted her in the hallway. You know, he stated, tomorrow could be your opportunity. She regarded him with confusion. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Don't be taken aback if I request you perform for the audience. Just a brief distraction. It might be enjoyable. Her stomach tightened. I would prefer not to, sir. He lifted an eyebrow. Fortunately, I wasn't seeking a request, and so the decision was made swiftly. She found no rest that night, not due to worry about humiliation, but because she understood his intentions precisely. He desired a display, and she was uncertain whether to provide it or deny it. By noon the following day, the Whitlow estate no longer resembled a home. It appeared like a performance stage. White tents were erected over the manicured lawn. Cream linen draped the tables, shimmering beneath centerpieces of fresh orchids and color lilies. Jazz musicians tuned their instruments on the terrace. Uniformed staff moved with precision, pouring wine, adjusting placements, and folding napkins with the artistry of origami. Beverly kept her head down, as was her habit. She arranged canapes, assisted in polishing stemware, and patrolled the perimeter with a tray of cucumber water and melting ice cubes. No one made eye contact with her. She didn't object. The feeling of being unseen offered comfort, a sense of security. However, her hands trembled. The source of her anxiety wasn't the piano itself. It was the underlying motive. She was certain Whitlow wasn't offering her a genuine opportunity. He was orchestrating a joke, and she was the target. As the clock reached 4 p.m., the attendees began to arrive. Real estate developers, local judges, business owners, art patrons, and women displaying polished smiles. They flowed in, embracing, laughing, enjoying drinks, and casually mentioning names. From the shade of the veranda, Beverly observed them move across the lawn as if they were born on polished marble. She fell out of place here. Not among these people. Not in this house. Not even in this city some days. But she wasn't here to fit in. She was here to serve. By 615, the band had paused, and Charles Whitlow was feeling confident. 2 glasses of red wine in and a dozen compliments later, he strolled to the center of the lawn and raised his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice strong enough to draw attention from everyone. Before dinner is served, I thought we'd enjoy a brief, unexpected entertainment. Beverly paused. Her tray shifted a little. Some guests applauded quietly. Others glanced around, seemingly puzzled. Whitlow proceeded, his smile constrained. It turns out one of our staff members possesses a hidden talent. Beverly? People looked over. She remained still. He waved expansively toward the open French doors leading to the music room. Someone suggested I play something, recalling I occasionally play the piano. A few laughs rippled through the room, a gentle amusement typical of those accustomed to wealth and charmed by unexpected moments. Applause and quiet whispers followed. Beverly paused, experiencing the uncomfortable feeling of deciding between declining and complying. Yet, she didn't retreat. She gave her tray to a server, dried her hands on her apron, and entered the building. The guests followed, now filled with curiosity. Within the music room, the grand piano was positioned under gentle lighting, appearing as if it had been awaiting attention all day. Beverly settled onto the bench, her posture upright, her heart racing. A profound silence descended upon the room. Charles leaned against the doorway, holding a glass, looking as confident as always. Whenever you're ready, she observed the keys. They remained still. Her fingers paused above them. The room anticipated something other than music. They expected a jest, a hesitant melody, a discordant note. A source of amusement for later, a way to diminish her. However, Beverly's musical journey didn't begin with jazz, gospel, or any extravagant style. It started with a lullaby her mother would hum, a simple sequence of just 5 notes, as gentle as a whisper. From there, she expanded upon it. Her hands moved deliberately, as if awakening something. Minor chords softened into major ones. Gospel rhythms subtly infiltrated classical phrasing. Jazz embellishments playfully highlighted each shift. The room fell silent. An awkward silence descended, not born of courtesy, but from a shared lack of words. One woman murmured, "Is this staged?" Another, her champagne flute suspended in the air, paused, forgetting to drink. Beverly remained unseeing, her playing as if transported to a different place, a sanctuary, a cherished memory. And Whitlow, still positioned near the door, had lost his smile. Not because of a thwarted scheme, but because of a sudden understanding. She hadn't been the object of ridicule. He had. There are instances in life when time seems to halt. The room, filled with costly timepieces and carefully crafted smiles, remained utterly still as Beverly Gaines infused each note with fragments of her history. Her performance wasn't intended to create an impression, nor was it directed at the mother. She played because for the initial time in several years, no one was dictating her identity. Her fingers moved confidently, not with uncertainty, but with profound, unspoken conviction. Not ostentatious, not rapid, simply genuine. Her left hand maintained the rhythm, consistently, like a quiet inhalation. Her right hand conveyed the narrative. A range of emotions resonated within the music: sorrow, defiance, and a subdued joy that constricted the chest. Even those unfamiliar with music sensed an internal resonance. The sole presence was the music itself. There are no sounds of silverware, no ringing phones, no hushed conversations. Just her, the piano, and 100 people holding their breath. In the corner, the band's saxophonist set down his drink and leaned forward, his jaw slightly parted. Across the room, a woman, visibly upset, murmured to her husband, "She's playing Duke Ellington." She then asked, "But that transition, did you notice it?" That was gospel. Beverly hadn't registered any of it. Instead, she recalled the sound of footsteps from 20 years prior, her mother pacing in their small kitchen in Tallahassee, humming while stirring beans over a low flame. She remembered the cracked metronome resting on top of her childhood piano. She recalled the tremor in her mother's hands near the end, yet she never missed a beat when playing. She recalled abandoning music the day following her mother's passing. She remembered storing it away, similar to a sweater that was outgrown, until today. Today, she allowed it to return. The concluding notes were subdued, lacking drama or spectacle, simply resonant. Like a statement finished because it felt whole, followed by silence. Not uncomfortable, not bewildered, but deeply respectful. Then applause arose. It began with a single person, an elderly man positioned at the rear, clapping deliberately, his gaze unfocused. Subsequently, another joined in. Then, the entire room rose to their feet. It wasn't driven by a sense of courtesy, but by the involuntary movement of their limbs. Beverly rose from a bench. Her hands now shook, not due to anxiety, but due to a different sensation. A feeling she hadn't experienced in years: relief. For the first time, the room regarded her not as a servant, not as an extra, but as someone who'd offered them something genuine. Someone quietly asked, "Who is she?" Beverly made no reply. She merely moved away from the piano and offered a slight nod. She didn't look at anyone and walked toward the hallway. Someone blocked her path. It was Ava Renfield, a local arts patron known for curating talent across the South. She stepped forward, stunned. "That was remarkable. Do you play professionally?" "No, ma'am," Beverly replied, lowering her eyes. "Were you trained?" Beverly paused. "A long time ago," Ava said, blinking. "Well, wherever it was, they should have built a stage around you." Others gathered. One guest asked if she taught lessons. Another offered her a card. A woman, her voice full of genuine feeling, stated, You made me feel something I haven't felt in years. Whitlow remained still, positioned close to the French doors, his smile absent. His gaze focused on Beverly, but it wasn't playful. It held something different. Could it be embarrassment? Possibly. Yet it appeared to be a pride he would never be able to acknowledge. Beverly didn't pause for his response. She had already given him more than he warranted, and retrieved something she believed she had permanently laid to rest. Outside, the party had resumed. Waiters replenished champagne flutes. The jazz band resumed playing on the terrace, but an alteration was perceptible, as if the tempo had altered. It was as if Beverly's music hadn't fully departed, but resonated within people, close to their hearts. Inside, Beverly had moved to the kitchen. She sought no fanfare. She desired no accolades. She simply needed to breathe. She rested against the counter, gazing at the floor, her apron still fastened. A few minutes elapsed. Harold, the groundskeeper, entered the room. He remained mostly silent, offering only a quiet whistle and crossing his arms. "You certainly know how to bruise a wealthy man's pride," he commented, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Beverly managed a faint chuckle, though it didn't reflect in her eyes. "I wasn't intending to do anything," she said. "That's precisely why it was so effective," he responded. She poured herself a glass of water. Her hands had become more stable, but her heart still raced. Harold departed shortly afterward. He preferred brevity, and Beverly valued that. Shortly thereafter, Charles Whitlow entered the kitchen. She didn't acknowledge him with a turn of her head. She didn't need to. He placed his glass down with unnecessary force. "You certainly made an impact," he remarked. Beverly remained silent. "I envisioned a brief, amusing exchange," he continued. "I didn't anticipate it evolving into a performance." Still, she offered no reply. He rested against the counter next to her. "Do you know what people are discussing? I'm harboring a talent within my own home. It feels as though I'm a character in a television drama." She made contact with his eyes, a look of composure and clarity. "You didn't conceal me. You simply didn't observe." His jaw moved slightly, a single twitch. "You believe you humiliated me?" "No, sir," she replied gently. "You accomplished that entirely on your own." He looked at her for a brief moment, then turned and departed. The subsequent day, telephone calls began. A representative from the Arts Council and a local music school inquired if she would contemplate offering a master class. A former producer received an invitation from a retired colleague for lunch. The experience felt dreamlike. People who had previously ignored her now regarded her differently. Beverly, however, did not respond to most of the calls immediately. She completed her scheduled responsibilities for the week, as was her routine. This included cleaning the floors, folding the laundry, and polishing the silver. Yet, a shift was evident in her movements. She no longer seemed to be attempting to remain unnoticed. That Friday afternoon, she entered Whitlow's office and submitted her resignation. 2 weeks. There was no explanation offered. He didn't request one. He simply nodded, examined the paper for a moment longer than necessary, and responded, "Fine." She prepared to leave. "You'll be back," he called after her. "They always come back," she replied, pausing in the doorway. "Perhaps, but not to you." Beyond the window, the wind rustled the garden hedges. Visitors would arrive and depart. The staff would be changed, and the gatherings would proceed. Yet, the recollection of that afternoon would linger. The issue wasn't the piano. It was the fact that the woman he attempted to control had subtly reminded everyone she wasn't under his authority, a mark he couldn't erase. Beverly Gaines, however, didn't seek retribution. She wasn't pursuing acknowledgement. She was at long last moving towards something positive, and it wasn't Charles Whitlow's house. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Beverly Gaines exited 742 Prospect Lane for the last time. There was no elaborate farewell, no presents, and no remarks from Charles Whitlow. The only sound was the creak of the iron gate as she closed it behind her, and the sun felt pleasant on her shoulders as she walked into the street. She still held the same canvas bag she had carried that first day. But she had changed, not because of the comments from the guests, the applause, or the unexpected attention to her talent. Those things had never truly been important to her. What mattered was that she had recalled who she was. and she wouldn't allow anyone to suppress that again. Returning to her apartment, she retrieved an old box from the back of her closet. It contained yellowing sheet music, a chipped metronome, a stack of journals from her early 20s, and a photo of her mother sitting at an upright piano. Eyes closed, hands mid-chord. That night, Beverly played until the neighbors knocked on the wall. She played every song she hadn't let herself touch in years. Pieces she thought she'd forgotten came back with ease. She navigated these experiences with amusement, albeit quietly and openly. Following a week of evenings dedicated to intensive work and mornings spent in quiet thought, she arrived at a resolution. She contacted the Arts Council again, and then the music school. She even responded to a call from a woman who wished to write a profile on her for a regional magazine. One by one, she reestablished contact. Not for recognition, not for praise, but because perhaps her talent could still be of use. After 2 months had passed, Beverly was providing piano lessons twice a week at a community center in Garden City. The majority of her students were children from working-class homes, along with a few adults, women who had always desired to play, but hadn't previously had the opportunity. She was patient, direct, and kind. She never discussed Charles Whitlow, nor did she mention the party. However, information spread. Following a lesson one day, a girl named Nia, who was just under 10 years old and full of energy, glanced up from the piano keys and inquired, "Ms. Beverly, did you truly work as a maid at that large house on Prospect Lane?" Beverly smiled. "I did," she responded. "Did they require you to play music?" "No, dear," she replied softly. "They attempted to humiliate me, but I determined what they would receive." Nia seemed puzzled for a moment. Then she smiled. "You're quite well known now," Beverly laughed. "I'm simply someone who recalled her identity." It was a feeling surpassing fame. She walked home that day, her shoulders squared and her head held high. This wasn't due to arrogance, but because she no longer bore any burden. Behind her, Charles Whitlow continued to host gatherings. However, news had circulated regarding the events of that summer evening. People recalled how Beverly played, the ensuing stillness, and how a room overflowing with wealth couldn't affect a woman who had nothing to validate. Some suggested Whitlow had altered since that time. Subtly, he consumed more alcohol and smiled less. Several familiar patrons ceased their visits. However, Beverly gave no consideration to these absences. She had music to instruct, pupils to motivate, and a life that was now entirely her own. Few individuals receive an opportunity to reclaim aspects of themselves they had previously relinquished. But occasionally, if one remains silent for a sufficient duration, the world presents a chance to speak with emphasis. And Beverly utilized hers with poise. For influence isn't always embodied by the most prominent voice present. It can feel like an unexpected melody, leaving people questioning why they ever had reservations about you. If you've ever experienced being underestimated, overlooked, or told you possessed less potential than you truly do, recall Beverly Gaines. And when your opportunity arrives, embrace it as if it were destined for you. Remember to subscribe for further stories of this nature. He entered the bank, his appearance marked by a tattered coat and old shoes. People assumed he was simply another person experiencing homelessness. Then, he spoke calmly, stating, "I own the land this building sits on," and presented documentation to support his claim. The door's chimes sounded as it always did upon entry, yet few people acknowledged it. They barely glanced up. A few fleeting looks were all it received. One woman subtly shifted her position to observe him before returning to her computer screen. Another took a sip of her coffee and rolled her eyes, murmuring something to the teller beside her. A man entering the space appeared out of sync with the surroundings, not threatening, simply different. The environment consisted of shiny glass, polished tile, and Bluetooth headsets visible behind the counters. This was Morris Coltrane Langston, age 62, with a thick gray beard. His coat was 2 sizes too large, and his jeans suggested a past no one wished to explore. He moved deliberately, not due to age, but with caution. Each step felt significant, as if he were assessing his place within the setting. He approached the counter where Brittany was working. She offered him a brief look. Sir, a bank card or ID is required for withdrawals, she stated plainly. Morris offered a gentle smile, though it seemed weary. I don't require a withdrawal. I need to discuss property, he said. Brittany's eyes widened slightly. She glanced at her colleague, who was visibly trying to contain laughter. Property? She asked. Yes, he confirmed. I believe I own the land this bank is built on. At that moment, the laughter erupted. The message originated from Cliff Yarrow, the assistant branch manager, who had approached, arms crossed. Cliff was a man who displayed his authority prominently. He made no attempt to conceal his amusement. Sir, I believe you are at the incorrect building, Cliff stated. This is not the county records office. You cannot simply enter and declare ownership of a bank. I did not say I own the bank, Maurice responded, his voice quiet. I said I own the land. There's a distinction. Now, all eyes were upon him. The security guard, identified as Lee, who typically appeared to be checking his phone near the door, stood up straighter and moved forward. Cliff questioned, Do you have any paperwork to back that up? Maurice slowly reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Lee reacted, conditioned by experience to anticipate a potential threat when a black man reached into a pocket. However, Morris's movements were unhurried and non-threatening. He carried the envelope deliberately, as if accustomed to it. He produced a thick, crumpled packet. The pages were yellowed with worn edges, having been folded and unfolded numerous times. At the top, it read, Franklin Delroy, 1913 land deed. Below that were stamped legal seals and notary signatures. I've held on to this since my father passed, I said. And he kept it since his father passed, Maurice added. The deed belonged to a black-owned cooperative that obtained plots throughout this section of Knoxville during the Reconstruction era. I tapped the envelope gently. This confirms my grandfather did not sell the land. It was leased. Ownership returned to us following a default, though this information was never shared. Brittany's smirk disappeared. Lee stopped scrolling. Cliff cleared his throat. I believe it's time for you to leave, sir, he stated. I think it's time someone examines the contents, Maurice said calmly. Then, an unexpected event occurred. A man from the office furthest to the left, John Delgado, the branch manager, emerged. He had been observing through the glass for the preceding few minutes. He requested the documents. Morris provided them immediately. John escorted them back to his office. A period of silence followed, lasting briefly. Subsequently, 5 minutes elapsed, then 10. Eventually, John appeared. His expression was altered. Connect me with regional compliance on the line. Immediately, he stated. As phones began to ring and conversations grew concerned, Maurice remained still at his position by the counter. He was anticipating something, and they all understood, instinctively, that it wasn't a monetary request. Cliff walked back and forth behind the teller row, massaging the back of his neck, as if that would aid his comprehension of what he's heard. John Delgado continued on the phone, speaking in brief, strained sentences to someone at corporate. His office blinds were partially closed, but every few seconds, a glimpse of his face emerged from the gap. He wasn't smiling anymore. Brittany stood uncomfortably at her station, looking sideways at Maurice, who hadn't moved from his position. His hands were folded, and documents rested gently on the counter in front of him. Do you want to sit down? She finally asked, her voice softer. Maurice shook his head. I've done enough sitting in my life. A man in a tailored suit and thick-rimmed glasses walked in briskly from the back entrance. His ID badge read Gerald Tisdale, Regional Property and Compliance. He went straight to Delgado's office without a word. Moments later, John opened the door again and waved for Maurice. Sir, would you mind stepping in for a moment? Maurice nodded once and retrieved his envelope. His boots made a slight scuffing sound against the tile as he entered the office. As the door closed behind him, the remaining staff members quieted. No one spoke. Even the security guard adjusted his position, uncertain whether to remain nearby or act as if nothing was occurring. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Mr. Langston, Gerald stated cautiously, I've reviewed the original deed and the tax history you provided. Could you please tell us where you've been keeping these documents? My father kept it in a box of his belongings, Maurice responded. He was a carpenter, building houses in Alcoa and Maryville before his knees failed. After he passed away, I kept the papers in a locker at a storage unit I used when I lacked permanent housing. Delgado appeared astonished. You're saying this land was never sold? That the trust was still active? Maurice retrieved a smaller, more recent envelope and gave it to Gerald. Inside was a typed letter from a small firm in Chattanooga, a probate specialist named Lena Fry, confirming the lapse in city filings and the reversion clause in the original agreement. The letter was dated 6 months ago. I only found it after she assisted me in reviewing some of my dad's old files. Thought it was junk at first, Gerald said, staring at the paper. His mouth opened a little, but he didn't speak. Legally, Maurice explained, this building stood on land that was part of my grandfather's estate. The lease agreement had been temporary. As the bank underwent mergers and changes in ownership over the years, the arrangement wasn't renewed. They simply built on the land, presuming no one would inquire. Delgado rubbed his temple. That represented decades of transactions, Maurice stated, and not a single one examined the records far enough back. Everyone seemed to think the past had resolved itself. Gerald rose quickly and gazed out the office window. We need to involve legal right away, he stated. Already done, John responded quietly. A voice drifted from outside the office, speaking too loudly. Why would a homeless man return for this now? What would he possibly do with a piece of land beneath a bank? Inside, Maurice noticed. He glanced towards the window, then resumed looking at Gerald. I didn't come for money, he said. I came seeking the truth, and perhaps a measure of respect. Gerald turned, finally meeting my eyes. There was a pause. You were not wrong, but while discussions focused on compliance and liability, something else was unfolding in the lobby. Whispers had escalated to murmurs, and one employee was already texting someone outside the bank. The story, as it turns out, began long before Maurice ever entered that bank. Prior to the advent of smartphones, before suburban expansion consumed agricultural land, before the concept of a man like Maurice could be envisioned, standing serenely with a document, contesting the very core of a multi-million-dollar organization. In 1913, Franklin Delroy, Morris's grandfather, was 23 years old and already recognized within Blount County for his skilled workmanship. His hands constructed churches, schoolhouses, and porches that remained standing a century later. Unbeknownst to many, Franklin was also a member of a discreet, close-knit group of black tradesmen, farmers, and ministers who combined their resources to purchase land. The purpose wasn't financial gain, but a matter of dignity. They identified as the East Bluntland Cooperative, and, throughout the years, they obtained small plots on the periphery of what was then essentially cow pasture. However, Franklin, ever the visionary, included a specific provision in his deed. Should the land ever undergo development, leasing, or a claim by another party without a sale, ownership would return to his descendants after a specified duration. In 1927, a lumber company made a payment to lease the land for a limited time. Subsequently, a warehouse was constructed, followed by a small credit union. By the 1970s, that credit union had transformed into a regional bank. And when it was acquired again in 2003, all of the original documents were misplaced, overlooked, or lost within the new ownership. The Delroy family was never notified. Franklin was gone by that point. Morris's father, Jasper Langston, attempted to preserve the family's history. However, circumstances grew difficult. Employment opportunities disappeared, and Jasper began drinking. The traditional stories evolved into mere bedtime stories, losing any sense of verifiable truth. Morris recalled sitting on the porch in his youth, listening to his dad describe the plot by the rail tracks that Granddaddy owned. Yet, it held little significance for him. The stories remained just that, stories, until he matured and understood how families like his were frequently excluded from their own history. In 2020, when COVID caused widespread closures and Morris was residing in a church basement in Sevierville, he finally sorted through the last of his father's possessions. Among them, he discovered the original deed carefully wrapped in wax paper, and within it, a small note written in his dad's handwriting. If you find this, don't let him tell you we didn't leave anything behind. Morris took that note with great importance. He dedicated months to research at the public library. He made trips to the county clerk's office. He consulted with Lena Fry, the probate attorney who remained professional when he shared the story with her. She located the land records and carefully compared parcel numbers, and she verified his findings. The land, now valued at millions, had been leased, not sold. The original clause remained in effect. No legal purchase had ever occurred. Consequently, after years of homelessness, this situation seems quite unusual. Morris entered the building constructed upon his grandfather's land and stated something unexpected. "I believe this belongs to me." At the bank, John Delgado now had the documents spread across his desk. They contained a century's worth of signatures, carbon copies, and ink stamps from courthouses that no longer existed. Gerald, the regional compliance officer, examined one page as if it had committed a personal offense. According to this clause, he stated, the property returns to the original family if the lease expires without renewal or sale. John confirmed this had occurred twice, and the family was not notified. That's correct. A significant silence followed. Then Gerald quietly expressed concern, saying, "We're in trouble." Maurice remained seated opposite them, silent. He showed no sign of a smile. However, a sense of calm was evident on his face. It was as if a man had, at long last, joined together all the pieces of a puzzle and possessed the perseverance to complete it. As events aligned within that office, a woman on her lunch break began live streaming the growing disturbance outside the bank. The unfolding situation quickly transcended their internal narrative. The lobby's ambience underwent a change. Initial silent assessment evolved into quiet wonder. The atmosphere then became something different altogether, a palpable sense of nervous anticipation. A teller had moved away from her workspace and was positioned by the coffee machine, appearing to stir sugar while observing the office door as if expecting someone to enter. The security guard had repositioned himself, now standing nearer to Morris's chair, seemingly not for protection, but perhaps to observe. Beyond the glass partitions, John Delgado's office was full. Gerald Tisdale was participating in a video conference with a group of legal representatives from corporate, their faces difficult to interpret. A senior counsel, Mark Levin, repeatedly posed the same inquiry. How did this oversight occur? No one could provide a satisfactory explanation. The numerous transfers of ownership involving various parent companies and banks had obscured the documentation until Morris brought it back to their attention. There's a public title gap, Gerald stated. No signed release, no recorded sale. The reversion clause was never satisfied. Mark Levin moved closer to the screen. Does this man, Langston, possess the original documents? John stated that he has more than just documents. He has lineage, and we verified the parcel data. It's the same land. The only alterations were the asphalt and steel constructed upon it. Mark pinched his nose. Okay, here's what we need. Secure a release from this man. Offer a small settlement. Remove him from the building before the press arrives. Maurice, seated quietly nearby, understood their thinking without needing to hear the discussion. He understood the atmosphere. After decades of observing how people assess your value, John ended the call and turned to him. Mr. Langston, would you be willing to settle this today? We could quietly arrange compensation, something equitable. Morris folded his arms. What's fair to you? John paused. That would require negotiation. But if we act quickly, we could avoid unwanted publicity. Maurice chuckled softly. Unwanted by whom? John momentarily looked surprised. A knock sounded at the glass door. A woman, identifiable by the local news logo on her lanyard, smiled and raised her phone. Hello. We've received information that someone entered with a land deed asserting ownership of the bank property. May we speak with Mr. Langston? John's face visibly drained. Who informed you? A voice from the lobby murmured. The live streams have exceeded 12,000 viewers. Morris rose to his feet deliberately. There's nothing to be concerned about. I'm not intending to cause a disturbance. Gerald approached. Mr. Langston, please understand that this situation requires careful handling. It would benefit everyone involved if we could maintain discretion. I attempted a subtle approach, Maurice stated. I'm accustomed to quiet. It defined much of my existence. It yielded no progress. A pause settled over the group. Gerald seemed poised to object, but a palpable truth lingered, inescapable. Returning to the lobby, Brittany spoke softly to Maurice. The amusement had vanished from her face. Do you truly possess this? She inquired. I have always possessed it, he replied. The recollection seemed to simply vanish. She lowered her gaze, a hint of embarrassment visible. I'm sorry. Morris's expression eased a little. It's not your fault. You were instructed on how to behave when someone like me enters. The bank's doors opened once more, and two additional reporters entered. A man carried a boom microphone over his shoulder. Another began recording with his phone. Cliff attempted to block their entry. This is private property. A reporter responded, observing Maurice. Not for long. As inquiries began from the media, Maurice did not seek attention. He instead glanced back at the familiar envelope he held, the one that held his family's history across generations, and understood it was time for the world to know it. Maurice needed no microphone. He needed no formal announcement. He simply needed to remain where he was. That was sufficient. A reporter, a woman in her 40s named Kimber Rowland from WBR, approached. Mr. Langston, could you verify that you assert ownership of the land the bank occupies? Maurice met her gaze, unwavering. I'm not asserting anything, he stated. I'm presenting facts, and the document in my hand demonstrates what none of you ever took the time to investigate. Kimber nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the significance in his tone. What outcome are you pursuing with this? Maurice didn't respond immediately. He turned to address the increasingly large gathering. There were customers, employees, and security present, with some people watching from the sidewalk. What I'm hoping for, he said finally, is that the next time someone walks in looking like I do, maybe people won't react with amusement first. The silence that followed was palpable. The young man who had been laughing earlier near the coffee machine suddenly looked down at his shoes. Brittany tightened her grip on her ID badge and avoided his gaze. Cliff shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. Look, sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. You need to comprehend. We simply weren't prepared. There was laughter. Maurice intervened. You all responded that way. The moment I entered the room, you observed my coat, my shoes, the discoloration on my hands, and you determined I was insignificant. No one spoke. Have you ever considered how many people you're likely to dismiss each day? Moving around here as if you possess all the knowledge, as if you've already assessed someone's narrative merely by viewing their exterior. John Delgado moved ahead, attempting to redirect the situation. Mr. Langston, we are ready to offer a formal apology and begin settlement negotiations. Maurice gave him a drawn-out, weary look. Do you still believe this concerns finances? A teenager with a camera phone murmured to his friend, out of view of the reporters, Dude, this person is really committed. Observe the documents. Kimber, perceiving something more significant, inquired, Where have you been until now? What prompted you to come forward at this time? Maurice sighed, not an annoyance, simply in contemplation. Following my dad's passing, I lost interest in matters of this nature. I was preoccupied with basic survival, taking on sporadic jobs like roofing, welding, and janitorial work whenever available. Maintaining stable housing proved difficult when people avoided direct interaction. I experienced periods of both prosperity and hardship, followed by even more challenging times. He paused. There were nights I slept under bridges and mornings I cleaned the same floors people used to ignore me. However, I never discarded that envelope. The memory of every shelter I stayed in, every town I passed through, remained with me. He held it up gently. It's all I had left from a man who believed we were worth more than people thought. And one day, I simply grew weary of silence. A woman from the crowd spoke softly. You kept the deed all these years? Maurice nodded. 50 years it stayed in our family. Passed from one calloused hand to another, Kimber asked. And what now? He surveyed the bank lobby, his gaze lingering on each employee who had assessed him that morning. What now? He repeated. Now you recall my name. From a corner location, Gerald spoke to John. This is going to be a public relations disaster. However, the individuals within the bank weren't observing Gerald. They were observing Maurice. truly observing, some for the first time, as if a barrier had been removed, not just from his narrative, but from theirs as well. You believe I was unseen? Maurice stated softly. I remained present. You simply didn't observe carefully enough. However, the outside world had already begun to notice. They perceived a man who brought more than just a deed to that building. He carried evidence that dignity isn't derived from affluence. It arises from steadfastly maintaining one's identity. By the following morning, the narrative had spread beyond state lines. Every local news station in Tennessee aired a rendition of it. Some reported inaccuracies. A report suggested Maurice had assumed control of the bank, a claim that proved false. Nevertheless, the message spread. Residents of Blount County, particularly older individuals, began searching through attics and storage boxes, questioning what they might have overlooked. College students shared excerpts online with accompanying text, such as "This exemplifies generational theft." To them, Maurice wasn't a news item. He represented an alert and a sign. At the bank, the situation quickly worsened. Legal representatives from the corporation arrived from elsewhere. Security personnel were now joined by local police officers patrolling the parking lot, employed for crowd management. Demonstrators had assembled along the sidewalk, displaying cardboard signs. Their messages included phrases like "respect land rights." Not just a deed, a legacy. He was right all along. Maurice hadn't organized the gathering, nor had he requested anyone to attend, yet they came. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald Tisdale was pacing once more, his face flushed as he managed calls from corporate and press liaisons. John Delgado was in his office, with the blinds completely shut, feeling the burden of everything. Maurice was in the break room, drinking coffee from paper cup. "Never thought I'd be allowed in here," he remarked, mostly to himself. Kimber Rowland had returned, and her camera crew was filming quietly from the parking lot. She wasn't trying to create problems. She was simply waiting for the story to unfold. That afternoon, a legal representative, Clay Addison, entered the bank. He possessed a clean-shaven appearance, a southern drawl, and wore a silk tie that appeared more valuable than Morris's entire wardrobe. He did not offer a smile. "Mr. Langston," Clay began, settling across from him, "let me start by saying our firm recognizes the validity of your documentation. We are here to discuss terms." Maurice listened intently, remaining still. "You've placed our client in a complex situation. We acknowledge the oversight and are ready to present a substantial financial offer for the permanent transfer of ownership." A paper was slid across the table by Clay. Maurice looked at it, then raised his gaze. "You believe this is the core issue?" he inquired, his voice level. "It's a considerable sum," Clay stated. "It's a price," Maurice replied, "and it doesn't come close to covering what you're attempting to resolve." Clay released a sharp breath. "What would be acceptable to you?" Maurice leaned forward, composed but resolute. "I want a plaque with my grandfather's name displayed out front. I also want the official record corrected with the city, and I want a foundation established in his name, one that provides housing for families who have experienced similar circumstances." Clay blinked. "Are you serious?" "I'm absolutely serious." There was a significant pause. Then Clay said, "I will present this to the board." "You please do that." Information about the negotiation became public the same day. And when it did, an unforeseen development occurred. People began making donations. People donated online, in person, and by check. One woman from Jackson traveled 2 hours to personally hand Maurice a $20 bill and express her gratitude for him, ensuring they weren't forgotten. The bank subsequently released a brief statement later that week, stating, "We recognize the validity of Mr. Maurice Langston's claim and are working in good faith to resolve this matter respectfully. We have deep appreciation for the legacy of Franklin Delroy and the community he helped build." While corporate and sanitized, this statement was unexpected. Regarding Maurice, there was no celebration. No press conference was held. He simply exited the bank one afternoon, carrying the same envelope he had entered with. However, this time he wasn't alone. 3 generations of Delroys stood with him in spirit, and hundreds more supported them. While legal teams assessed expenses and public relations teams prepared announcements, The most important aspect had already transpired. Someone like Maurice had finally been acknowledged, and the narrative was no longer controlled by the bank. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten. The sun shone that morning. Maurice Langston stood in front of the bank again. Now, he wasn't standing on disputed land. He was standing on his grandfather's land, officially recognized by the city of Knoxville as part of the Franklin Delroy Legacy Trust. It wasn't just a name on paper anymore. A new plaque had been installed outside the bank's main entrance, embedded in a small brick pedestal near the sidewalk. Bronze letters, clear and lasting. Dedicated to Franklin Delroy, 1890 to 1954, builder, father, landowner. His legacy endures. Maurice touched it softly. The plaque felt cool beneath his fingertips. He remained silent. Words weren't necessary. A small group had assembled for the unveiling. Community leaders, students from the local university, reporters, and some of the same bank staff who previously ridiculed him were present. Brittany stood at the rear, her hands clasped, attempting to make eye contact with Maurice whenever he turned. This time he succeeded. The foundation he had proposed was already being established. A partnership with a local nonprofit was formed within weeks of the settlement. The Delroy Housing Fund would provide grants to families at risk of homelessness, particularly those who have been disadvantaged by legal complexities and overlooked actions. "I didn't desire revenge," Maurice told Kimber Rowland in his final interview. "I simply wanted the truth to endure beyond the falsehood." It had taken years to reach this point. For years, he had experienced being overlooked, marginalized, and disregarded. However, the instant he entered through those glass doors, holding a creased envelope and a legacy of suffering, things began to shift. And currently, he was simply a man identified by a name. He had acquired a modest, well-kept house not distant from the outskirts of Alcoa, close to the same areas where his father had previously constructed porches and fences. It wasn't elaborate, merely a neat area, a functional sink, a bed to relax in. Occasionally, he would sit on a plastic chair outside, sipping coffee and greeting children cycling up the slope. On other occasions, he collaborated with local high schools, discussing land ownership, family histories, and the consequences of oblivion with students. Preserve your documents, he advised them. Retain your names. Ensure no one erases your people from the narrative. People now referred to him as Mr. Langston. At times, even Sir, but the designation he valued most was the one his grandfather had attained. Builder. It wasn't about buildings, but about something larger. Legacy. He never anticipated forgiveness from the bank. However, it wasn't necessary. What he required, he received: an acknowledgement, a correction, and the opportunity for those who followed to declare, "I belong here too." The bank continued its operations, but the employees carried themselves differently. They engaged with people they had previously overlooked. They posed questions rather than making assumptions. The transformation wasn't flawless, but it represented a meaningful shift. One afternoon, several months following the resolution of events, Brittany approached him outside the community center. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice betraying nervousness. "Yes," he replied. I've been taking night classes. Real estate law." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he inquired. "After everything that happened, I realized how much I didn't know. About ownership, history, how things get passed down or lost." Morris smiled, slow and genuine. "Good for you." She paused. "I'm sorry for how I treated you that first day." He nodded. An apology wasn't necessary. It was owed to the individual who would next enter. She considered this thoughtfully, responding, "Yes, I will." He retrieved a copy of the original deed, a replica, to be exact, from his coat and gave it to her. "Keep this. Use it in class. Teach someone something." She accepted it with care, as if it were fragile. As she departed, Morris looked towards the street and observed a group of teenagers assembling at the bus stop across the road. One of them gestured towards the plaque. The others drew closer to listen. He remained silent, allowing them to continue. He simply observed, a quiet sense of pride welling up within him, as his grandfather's name emerged in the discussion once more. Perhaps That's how genuine transformation truly begins. Not through rage, nor solely through the pursuit of justice, but through remembrance and the bravery to keep it alive. Should you experience a feeling while hearing Morris's narrative, do not hold it back. Spread it. Discuss it. And if there's a family name you haven't mentioned in some time, vocalize it. The impact of legacies endures only when we actively preserve them. Subscribe for more stories that illuminate the true meaning of dignity.